On behalf of Travelers Insurance, thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Turning Risk into Resiliency and Growth. I'd like to extend a special welcome to Travelers agency and broker partners and our customers who are attending today. Please take a few moments to review this important note. I'm Brian Garrettson, Assistant Vice President and Manufacturing Segment Leader at Travelers, and I'll be your host and moderator today. I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn, where I regularly post about Travelers' perspective on what is happening in the manufacturing industry. Here is important information regarding the CE credit offering today. Your full attendance is required. Attendees must stay for the entire duration of the webinar, and attendees must answer all polling questions that will be posed during the presentation. For states not requiring an affidavit, no additional steps on your part are needed. If you requested CE credits by providing your state and license number during registration, the Institute's compliance team will verify your attendance and polling responses to determine your eligibility. They will report the credits to your state's Department of Insurance. And after reporting the credits, the compliance department will email your certificate. Expect to receive it approximately 10 business days after the event. You can contact the institutes at the address shown here if there's any questions. For these 5 states that require an affidavit, a little bit more work is needed on your part. Please complete the affidavit found in the related content widget on your screen and email that completed affidavit to info@ceu.com within 1 to 2 business days after the webinar. The institutes cannot report your CE credits until they receive the completed affidavit. All states are approved for CE credits except Alaska, Arkansas, Hawaii, Montana, and Oregon. Also, because we have a full hour of content, there's really no time for questions during the webinar. However, technical and CE-related questions can be directed to our support team via the chat function. And finally, a recording of today's webinar will be available and will be sent to the attendees. Let's get started. I'd first like to welcome and introduce our 2 guests for the webinar. Dr. Vincent Cataruccia, PhD, is a workforce health services and risk consultant and has worked with some of the most complex manufacturing businesses in the country. He's also the author of the book, Damned by the Diagnosis. Dr. Vince will share some of the ways he addresses lost time and claim costs while positively impacting behaviors from his frontline managers. Keith Anderson leads Travelers General Liability Claim Division, where he's responsible for the group's operational and resolution excellence, innovation initiatives, and advancing severity and litigation strategies. Today, Keith will give us a rare view from the courtroom and highlight the financial impact of litigation on companies. He'll also share his thoughts on the rise of nuclear verdicts and the importance of humanizing companies to mitigate their legal risks. For those of you who don't know us, manufacturing is our largest industry segment at Travelers. We walked our first factory floor over 100 years ago, and over the years, we've built our portfolio to include over 25,000 manufacturers across the country, from small to large. For larger buyers utilizing or considering third-party administration, Constitution State Services provides specialized claim management services for workers' compensation, general liability, and auto liability, delivered by our highly skilled professionals. For those of you in the audience who trust in Travelers or Constitution State Services for your insurance needs, we really appreciate and thank you for your business. At Travelers, we believe that better data means better decisions. And most recently, we were especially interested in how the C-suite is evolving in mid to large-sized businesses. So we completed a national CFO study. Here's what we learned specifically from manufacturing CFOs. Well, just like all businesses, they're concerned about their competition, inflation, and their talent. 87% of manufacturing CFOs share that they are highly confident that their company has taken strategic actions to ensure its future success. And they share that this confidence stems from their optimism about from 3 particular areas. One is their company's financial strength. Secondly, the efficiencies gained from adopting advanced manufacturing technologies like robotics, AI, and connected devices. And thirdly, the depth and loyalty of their customer base. Now, historically, the CFO role was focused on financial reporting, However, their roles are becoming much more expansive. 44% of manufacturing CFOs share that being a strategic advisor to the CEO is now a primary responsibility, driven in large part by the demands of merger and acquisition activity. Over the next 5 to 10 years, they shared that this trend will continue as they have multiple level stakeholder partnerships throughout their organizations that involve influencing the C-suite as well as managing business risks. And talent continues to be a main concern, with worker availability, turnover, and cost topping the list. As labor market continues to tighten and unemployment remains low, manufacturers are under additional pressure to protect these key workers. Yet what's interesting, of the companies we spoke with, only 33% are focused on employee training as a main concern to mitigate risk, compared to their top focus, which was cyber risk. Very interesting. Let's launch our first polling question. Which of the following strategic actions do you believe is most critical for ensuring the future success of mid to large size businesses in the manufacturing sector? You see 5 options here, and we'll take about 30 seconds to complete the poll. Give it about another 5 seconds or so. And let's go ahead and close the poll. And let's show the results, please. It appears that increasing investments in digital capabilities and emerging technology leads the pack in terms of the responses. And that's interesting. And we know that manufacturers are certainly investing in these technologies. Let's continue our story. Our CFO study research also revealed something very interesting. Almost 40% of companies wait until there's an incident to manage risks. However, what we know at Travelers is that a proactive rather than a reactive approach to risk management can create new avenues for optimizing operations, recruiting, protecting, and retaining employees, and fortifying their business against potential disruptions. Examples of this proactive risk management approach in manufacturing might be creative return to work programs for injured employees, or designing products to withstand the rigor of stricter regulations outside of the US. The ultimate goal of all this is to improve resiliency while positively impacting growth and over time reducing the total cost of risk to the organization. As one of the largest writers of workers' compensation insurance in the country, we see this trend of proactiveness, both a concern and an opportunity. According to our data, 35% of injuries in our manufacturing portfolio occur with first-year employees. This is impactful when you consider particularly the volume of new employee hiring that is happening within manufacturing. And it also highlights an opportunity to reevaluate the effectiveness of training and onboarding plans, not to mention checking in regularly with new employees and empowering shift managers with ownership of their safety results. We're going to ask Dr. Vince in just a moment on his perspective on some of these important things. Also, particularly powerful statistics from our report is the average number of days a manufacturing employee misses work due to a workplace injury. Consider the number, 67 days. That's over 2 months of lost productivity and indirect impact to other workers in the factory, not to mention ramp-up time and potential job modifications once the employee is ready to come back to work. Each day away from the plant floor is lost revenue for the business, and manufacturing executives should and are taking notice. Let's launch our second poll question. What do you believe is the most critical action for reducing the high rate of injuries among first-year employees in the manufacturing sector? You see 5 options here. And we'll keep the poll open for about 30 seconds. Get about another 5 seconds. And if we can close the poll, please. Looks like reevaluating the effectiveness of training and onboarding plans rises to your level of insight here. Very interesting. Now, ultimately, the goal of all these efforts, like I said, is to improve resiliency while positively impacting growth and reducing that all-important total cost of risk over time. Dr. Vince will share his thoughts and experiences about this in just a moment. But first, let's learn more about what's happening in the legal system and courtrooms with Keith Anderson. Keith, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Hello, everyone. I'm Keith Anderson, and I would also like to thank you for participating in this webinar. Our team has seen the financial impact on verdicts on the finances, brand, and reputations of companies. And so today we'd like to talk through that and help better educate you on the risks. Our team regularly talks to former jurors, ex-claimants, behavioralists, and it's through these conversations and other research, plus years of experience of doing this work, that we've come to understand the strategy of humanizing your company long before you ever need it is a competitive advantage. In this time of increased verdicts, we are all, including me as working for a corporation, need to be aware of the risks and more vigilant in preventing accidents. The costs of risk are just too high to be passive. Disengaged employees can lead to some exposures that aren't readily apparent and have consequences further down the road. When you think of liability exposures, it can realistically take up to 4 years before you know that there was an issue. An employer who makes employee engagement a priority can see the results in quality control, productivity, and in safety. We have seen a trend during this time of less experienced employees in the workplace creating more risks for a company, risk to their employees and risk to the third parties. Be aware whether it's an unfortunate accident or a product malfunctioning, most exposures are the result of an employee action or lack of action. We're in an interesting time, a great need for workers in the manufacturing space, but there are less qualified workers, and then also the rise of nuclear verdicts. It's an interesting combination that's taking place. And what we are seeing, as Brian mentioned, first-year injury stats at 35% are significant. There's less certainty about employees' qualifications, and employers need to validate qualifications, have a vigorous onboarding and training plan, and can't assume that somebody is plug and play. Companies need to check and confirm. And for example, if you are hiring somebody to drive a forklift in a warehouse, it's not good enough to just make sure or to take their word for it that they know how to drive a forklift, but you need to confirm and validate that they have that ability and they're giving all the safety precautions. We are also seeing emerging risk with temporary employee agencies. We're seeing the risk shift from the employment agencies to the companies that are hiring them. And this creates additional exposure for, in addition to workers' compensation, for liability claims. Now, the term social inflation we have used for some time is generally being replaced with the term called legal abuse, system abuse. And combining what's happening socially plus what's happening in the courtroom, corporate nuclear verdicts have nearly quadrupled from 4.9 billion in 2020 to 18.3 billion in 2022. The median nuclear verdict rose 95% from $21.5 million in 2020 to over $41 million in 2022, according to the Chamber of Commerce Institute for Legal Reform. Also, the U.S. Chamber has reported in their last report last month, November 24, the average tort tax increased to $4,207 per American household per year versus $3,600 that was reported in 2022. What we're seeing in the courtroom takes its toll on individual households. And according to the Perryman Group survey, the total legal system abuse on the US economy is staggering, resulting in a loss of 4.24 million jobs, close to $430 billion in output, and more than $110 billion in government revenues annually. On top of that, there is also an emerging industry. And we saw this industry several years ago, but it's becoming bigger, and that's litigation funding. And in essence, litigation funding are third parties investing in litigation or in cases to drive a high rate of return on those cases to make money for them. We've seen the growth in the industry beginning in 2020, $11.3 billion, and now in 2023, it's $15.2 billion. These investors are advertising 30% rate of return. We are fortunate that the government has taken notice of this funding because there have been some institutions and governments outside the US that have taken note of the potential returns and have invested in US litigation funding. We are actively working to have transparency in this issue and control what we are seeing in the courtroom. But to give you one example of one piece of litigation funding reported by the Buford Capital, and they're one of the largest litigation funders, in one case alone, they had a 37,000% rate of return that netted out $6.2 billion to them. Fortunately, it wasn't in the US, but it was in Argentina. But when we start seeing returns like that, we see more and more people enter this area. Now, I'd like to just give a couple examples of where we're seeing these nuclear verdicts. One of these was backed by litigation funding, but we're seeing these nuclear verdicts in the liability space that generally we didn't see because they were historically workers' compensation claims. The first is a clothing manufacturer. This clothing manufacturer, because they had seasonal shortage, or they needed seasonal temporary employees, they used a employee leasing firm, and they brought employees into their factory. For unknown reasons, one of these employees wandered away from her assigned area and found herself in an area where there was operating machinery. Somehow she got caught in that machinery and she was pulled into it, and the rollers was pulled into it by the rollers. And it was very unfortunate that it resulted in amputation to her hands. Historically, we would have said this is a workers' compensation exposure, but the manufacturing company in this instance chose to opt out of workers' compensation, exposing them to third-party liability. In addition, they had signed a contract with a leasing company that they would protect the leasing company. This went to the jury. The jury agreed with the plaintiff and their approach that you put somebody brand new to the floor in an area without training, without proper instructions on what to do, and also did not safeguard the machinery, resulting in a nuclear verdict. The next example is a food manufacturer, again, a sad case. But in this situation, an employee was taking the waste from the food production line and putting it into the dumpster. As he was putting it into the dumpster, he lost control of the garbage can and it fell into the dumpster. And in this particular dumpster, half of it was internal, half of it was external. He jumped into the dumpster in order to retrieve the trash can. And coincidentally, at the same time, the waste company was picking up the trash. And unfortunately, this man was crushed. Based on the laws in this state, the plaintiff was able to bring a direct action claiming gross negligence against the food manufacturer. They claimed they had no policy or procedures on how to dispose of the trash, about getting into the trash dumpster, and had no warning signs. Historically, we would have thought it makes perfect, and they did have some documentation, but not enough to overcome our ability to have the case disposed of through motion practice. They were successful in getting to the jury that that the defendant in this case was responsible, resulting in a significant verdict. Again, another case where we typically think it was workers' compensation, but where nobody's immune from that tort liability, especially when they're alleging gross negligence. In this case, although the jury found comparative fault on the part of the plaintiff, because it was a gross negligence, the manufacturer had to pay the entire verdict. In 2019, Travelers, we did our own research, and we conducted a survey with 500 potential jurors, asking them several questions about their attitudes towards litigation and businesses as a whole. People, and what we learned and what we suspected going into, people are more likely to sue today than they were back in 2011. Nearly 30% of the respondents said they are more likely to sue today versus then. Interestingly, the age group from 18 to 34 was much more likely to sue, and they were 60% above the average. And when we think about that going forward and that age group, do they keep the same attitudes and behaviors going forward, or as they age and gain a little more wisdom, do they have the same perspective? These are things that we need to continue to watch and make sure we understand. But considering the social factors out there in the plaintiff's bar, really being aggressive and investing in cases, we have a perfect storm of what's happening right now. And it goes back all the way to the financial crisis of 2008. We see an increased attention on healthcare and rising medical costs, an overreaching anti-corporate sentiment that has been growing in pockets of our society, and then the online world that we live in, and people literally living their lives online. During this evolution, the plaintiff's bar has adjusted, and they are treating litigation as a business. It is no longer making somebody whole, but it's maximizing returns, and the injured party or the plaintiff in a case has become an investment mechanism. And they've built a business around it, both from the way they advertise and take in claims and really identify where they're going to maximize their recovery. And claimants' behaviors and plaintiffs' behaviors have also changed. A willingness to have multiple surgeries in order to drive up the economic damage. They are willing to engage in litigation funding by taking out loans to have surgeries and other medical treatment. And then when you think about the litigation funding as a whole that generally was for class actions, we are now seeing it in discrete events with one plaintiff. So the environment is challenging right now. And some other research we have done has shown that that a do more mentality in society, that companies should always do more than meet the government standards, and they should take any and all precautions, no matter how impractical or costly, to ensure the safety of their product. Note that when safety standards are imposed, and seatbelts is a great example, society tends to complain that their freedom is taken away from them. Yet, when it comes to determining liability on a safety standard or following a government standard or a higher standard, they have no issue in deciding liability and offering compensation. It appears to hold companies to a higher standard and their financial payout versus direct cost to services and products. The appearance of a systematic failures is in protecting the public has become a large factor, whether a jury finds liability and whether they award large amount of money. Safety history and safety documentation becomes critical for a defendant or a business when they are defending themselves. Now, moving forward just a little bit, and as we see the plaintiffs' bar's tactics change, and as they try to maximize recoveries, they are taking what they have been able to do with nuclear settlements and convert those into, or nuclear verdicts, and convert those into nuclear settlements. And what I've put in here is an example that you need to be aware of as a potential defendant. If you haven't been a defendant and haven't received one of these things, a letter like this, be prepared. At some point you will. So this letter came from a very prominent plaintiff firm that does very well. They also engage in litigation funding. But this letter went out approximately a month after an accident, a significant injury, but liability hasn't been established. Nobody knows culpability, significant comparative negligence. It's early on in the claim where we need to understand things and the plaintiff doesn't know everything. But this is what they sent to the defendant's lawyer with the intent to get to the business, which they will, it will. Your lawyer has a duty to give it to you. But here's what they said, and this is just a portion of the letter, but this is them planting the seed with the defendant that this is a significant case, even though it may not be. And I've highlighted some words. Indisputable liability. Nobody knows that at this point. We're going to expose you to a verdict well in excess of your total insurance limits of $19 million. That right there is an attempt to get the defendant, the manufacturer, to contact me, the insurance carrier, and say, get me out of this case right now, because I'm being told that I'm going to experience economic annihilation, extinction of my business, and that my business is going to be condemned to economic extinction. This is a fear tactic, but it has been effective in some cases. But this is where you lean in and work with your insurance broker, with your insurance carrier. You are the experts at what you do. Wherever you transfer your risks are an expert at managing risk, and we should not be, and everything we should take consideration to, but we should not be looking at this scare tactic to dictate our future. So, many date the anti-corporate sentiment back to 2008 financial crisis. That may be the case, regardless when this happened and when this anti-corporate sentiment began. What it does tell us, though, there's more litigation, and it's likely to find yourself as a defendant in a case. So another component of what we're seeing in the industry is we call it the theater in the courtroom, which can be a significant driver. And we work with a company called Magna, and they did a polling and on potential jurors, and to find out who was the least trusted in the courtroom. So we'd like to do a polling question here real quick. And you can see the options of who is the least trusted in the courtroom.
And we'll keep this poll open for about 30 seconds.
Thanks, Brian. All right, are we good to close the poll?
Yeah, it's a long 30 seconds, about another 5 seconds for those interested in those CE credits. And we can close the poll now.
Okay, a smart group, and this is an unfair answer because we don't believe this to be true, but you are being portrayed as a villain, the corporate executives. So it's more important ever to personalize your company and the corporate defendant, things that need to be done in the courtroom, your goodwill and talking about your goodwill and what you do for your employees, how you give back to the community. You do not want to be a faceless entity. You want to put a face behind the corporation. And although the CEO and CFO are being villainized in this case, which we don't believe to be true, that is the tactic. And we recommend that you look at your frontline managers and middle managers to be the face of a corporation. Juries identify with them. They identify with the working person that's on the floor, that's working with the employees. They need to be the face of the corporation versus just a name and a suit behind it. So if we, so I'm going to just finish with my top 10 list or top 8 list. And this comes from experience and what we have learned as an organization. So properly train and hold people accountable. That's the key. You have to have a strong safety culture. Go above and beyond applicable regulations and safety standards. Plan for the worst and treat every incident as it could substantially threaten your business and reputation. Take it seriously. Now, this next one, if you hear nothing else from me today, hear this one. Proactive investigation and freeze the facts. When something happens, take it seriously, gather all information, preserve it, the facts, the photos, the video that may be there, the statements, employees come and go. Freeze all the facts, gather all the information. You will need it at some point. And if you don't have it, somebody is going to create the facts or tell your story in the courtroom, which isn't going to be accurate. You need to have the truth and accuracy on your side. Establish a catastrophic plan, corporate awareness. This starts with top executives all the way through all employees. Now, be actively involved in your claims, be engaged in communications with your insurer and broker. You are part of the defense team. You need to be actively engaged. And finally, be present during trials, depositions, discovery. Plaintiff lawyers get concerned when they see you as a company taking a case seriously, knowing that a jury is going to look at you as the person and not as a faceless corporation. So with that, thank you for your time, and I will turn this back to Brian.
Thanks, Keith. And I love this top 8 because Dr. Vince is an exemplar of these top 8, these behaviors that he's instilled in his organizations, and we'll learn a little bit more about that. And always insightful to hear from you, Keith, around what's going on in the courtrooms. You know, many of the attendees today are agents and brokers, partners of ours. You have a role in this with your clients, leaning on your insurance carriers to support your manufacturing customers as well. So thank you for those efforts. Dr. Vince, welcome to the discussion finally after 30 minutes. Appreciate you. You've consulted with numerous manufacturing companies over the years, some of them very complex, like your current one, helping them reduce claim injuries, claim dollars, improving that reporting time, that reporting lag, which is always so important. We really love to learn from you today, especially around these top 8. And we have some questions for you because you're in the trenches every day, right? You're on the front line with your workers, and we're gonna focus on some of that. So, first question for you: as you come into a new organization, what's the hardest cultural transformation around safety that you typically see and that you have to navigate? And maybe if there is a merger or acquisition happening or on the radar.
Well, hello, thank you. I'm Dr. Vince. Thank you, Keith. Yes, I'm right in the trenches. And in fact, to this point, the company that I'm consulting with right now just came out of that exact state of merger and acquisition. So when you enter a company like that, typically it's been very much face forward, production, revenue generation. There's a lot missed in the humanizing portion of any of the companies that I've met in merger or acquisition status. So it's an interesting kind of separate type of company in terms of what needs to happen for them. And really it's simple. They need to face forward behavior and culture and leadership that needs to be kind of revitalized in that type of company. Generally speaking, in a company, what I find traditionally, there's a very reactive methodology when it comes to risk management or safety. There really needs to be a paradigm shift where the new normal would be thinking about early intervention, proactive programming. You need to get ahead of the issues. I have a little saying that when I first meet a company, safety tends to be a broom sitting in the corner waiting for the mess to hit the floor. I would rather it be, how about the mess never hits the floor? We don't need the broom. Let's make sure we're doing everything we need to do on a mindful level to keep track of our employees, understand where they're at, and meet them there, and fill the gaps as they are seen.
Yeah, it's interesting, Vince, that you mentioned this reactive approach to risk management, and indeed our CFO study, including manufacturing CFOs, revealed that most companies, 38%, had only 38% had a proactive approach, leaving nearly 60% of those companies in a reactive manner. So what you've seen in your own journey, is playing out in the data that we're seeing as well. And there's a real opportunity, especially as we think about what's happening in the courtroom around making sure that the mess doesn't hit the ground to begin with, right?
Well, and that's exactly
even
right.
though that broom is in the corner.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, if it does come to the point where there is a trial, you're in a better position if you're close to your employee. Mm-hmm. If that relationship that you've had over time is good, you're going to be less prone to have a messy case because the employee is going to be more prone to work with you. You've established a familial type of bond with your staff. And, most people aren't litigious from birth. They become that over time and having poor experiences with employers. So that's the cultural shift that we need to make.
Right. We've always talked about safety culture being important, right? But I think in light of all the external factors and the pressure and the rising cost of risk, right? The total cost of risk, whether that's the safety programs themselves or the cost of insurance or deductibles, those sorts of things, it's real for a business leader, a manufacturing leader to recognize and address. I'd like to tie back a little bit because you mentioned the M&A activity, and there's so much of that going on within manufacturing and some other industry sectors globally. There almost appears to be this time of uncertainty, right, for employees on the front, who are on the plant floor, managers that are supervising them and leading them, and then others within the organization. Your thoughts on the short-term versus long-term view, and in a time of uncertainty for most employees in these situations.
Yeah, that's an interesting scenario. All the decisions are typically being made from the executive leadership tier behind closed doors. So even your managers, supervisors, superintendents are standing outside of that door wondering what's next. The level of uncertainty, it breeds unrest, right? It also sets you up for risk because people that aren't secure, people that feel insecure are going to be a little bit more scatterbrained. They're going to be a little bit less attentive to what they should be paying attention to, more worried about looking over their shoulder about what's coming. And communication is a word that really, really stands out when it comes to the mergers and acquisition type of companies. It's almost as if someone takes the spigot and shuts it off so that decisions can be made higher. And then the employee management staff is kind of guessing at what's happening. It's a very uncertain environment to be in.
not understanding necessarily where they fit within the future of the company.
Well, exactly.
Right?
If there is one, right?
Right.
If there is a future.
Right. Yeah. So maybe lots of theoretical maybe discussion in that last question. I'd love to bring it down to like that day to day. And I know you're a big data guy, and you're always tracking the impact of change in behaviors and processes. This takes some effort, right? Especially if you're coming in new to an organization. What type of data, can you share with us what type of data and approaches that you use to kind of initially assess a safety program, and how do you track the performance over time?
Yeah, so data is interesting. I use it to get a pulse on the company when we first start, and we want to understand where the culture really is and why risk is happening. But then we take it into a very finite way of understanding the data and maybe the metrics that are actually accrued. So rather than looking at just the TRIR or the incidence rate of a company, which is a number companies love to just hug and envelop and use to manage their operation, but there are other metrics that lead up to that. And I would like to just quickly regress. There's a rule of 10, right? So for every 10 near misses, you have one first aid. For every 10 first aids, you have one recordable. So at the end of the day, shouldn't we start to track and understand, really dive into the near miss if we want to get ahead of risk? So rather than just use incidence rate or mod rate or EMR or things like this, I would tend to have a company really pay attention to the little things that end up becoming the big thing. So for instance, in this company, we have a health services department. I pay attention to when a person comes in for Advil. I want to know if they have, stress-related neck tension. So I have these nurses logging every interaction so that we can really understand what the complexion of our plant floor is, so you can get ahead of it early. So we'll do lunch and learns. We'll do different types of organizational tracks to get ahead of the big risk.
There's really kind of these early indicators, right, of incidents that ultimately can impact the total cost of risk, like we've been talking about, but also kind of sideline the business, especially if it's a key employee that's injured on the line. So any advice for a company that maybe doesn't have the benefit of nurses on staff or a full health and safety department? Can they track similar to what you do in your large organization today?
Yeah, so I believe that no matter what size the company, you're always going to have a champion, one or two people that have a genuine interest in making things better. So for instance, I bridge a gap between health services and safety, and I'm an ambassador that walks the floor 4 hours a day, just touching the lives, hearing the stories, asking how people are doing. It doesn't have to be big and it doesn't have to be expensive. You just need to have that champion in your company that faces the employee and then sits with the executive leadership team to say, hey, this is what's going on the floor, because your executive leadership team might not get out there. They may not have the time or opportunity. So within the confines of whatever size company you have, you do have the ability to take advantage of someone on your staff and elevate them, make them a champion. It's a great way to keep a pulse on how your company's doing.
You make them a champion of those early indicators, right?
Absolutely.
I love it. So as we think about manufacturing business who are looking to refine or improve their safety programs, their return to work programs, just kind of ramp things up, especially in light of verdicts that are not work comp anymore, that they're GL, like Keith had talked about, general liability. How do you lean on your insurance carriers to support the efforts that you're trying to do.
Yeah, this is a beautiful conversation. I can tell you that when I first started with this corporation, I had no clue the breadth and depth of ability Travelers offered to the company. So Travelers Group, for instance, brought in their transitional duty program, and I was just about to create that from scratch. And this is an awareness that I, unfortunately, at the ripe old age of 52, I learned it late. And now is a great time to share it with people and say, look, make sure you understand what the offering is. The insurance company isn't just sitting there for the rainy day. They're there to help you through every day. And you have, Travelers especially, has an amazing cohort of experts that can be drawn from to help the company that you're working for through any sort of programmatic issue you might have or desire to create program. So definitely is something to research and understand. Whatever carrier you may be working with, Travelers in this case is a very capable corporation within insurance. In that world, it's a very capable company to help you in any of the risk management or safety programming. You have it all already. Why redesign the wheel?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the plug for Travelers, and we're in good company with a lot of carriers out there that provide good services, and for the agents and brokers who are attending today, right? You have a place in this conversation as well,
Yes.
Bridging those services for your client on behalf of your client with your carrier as well. Vince, can you share any like movement in terms of return to work utilizing Travelers Corridor of Care program?
Oh, yeah. So we worked very closely with Travelers in their Corridor of Care early on in 2023. We came into that year with a TRIR of almost 9, and we implemented a transitional duty program, a return to work program, modification of duty program, all with the help of Travelers. And we are sitting right now at 2.6 in terms of a TRIR. And what it really did was it created a pathway corridor between our supervisors, managers, and employees, where if somebody got hurt, we all of a sudden realized that we're all responsible for the outcome of that injury. And we made them a part of the resolution of the injury, keeping the employee on the floor within their department. So we worked with every department to come up with 5 optional jobs that a person could do if they did get hurt. It doesn't matter what their restriction is, we can still serve them inside their department. And we have 0 lost days. We just don't have it anymore because we have options for all of our employees. And that took the collaboration of Travelers in the Corridor of Care, our supervisors, managers, and our executive leadership team. They all needed to say, yep, go, run with it. Do whatever you need to do. Let's make this happen. And throughout the course of 2023, it completely reversed our TRIR, and we're actually headed towards a sub 1 for 2025.
Wow.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and that's the impact of a proactive risk management program, right? Versus
absolutely
having the broom on the sideline waiting to sweep up.
Exactly.
Right? And it requires effort. It requires sometimes capital investment, but it requires commitment right from the C-suite, which you are influencing as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Part of like this proactive too, right? So we've talked about like the internal focus, on the plant floor and behaviors, those sorts of things. But part of your work too is influencing and working with the external environment, particularly your medical providers. we'd love to hear like how did you like change, the impact that those providers are making with you? What were your best practices?
Well, so that's a very, very key element in the success of a very good risk prevention program. You have to get outside of your company and you have to meet with third-party providers. You have to sit with the providers and let them know what your program entails, and that, look, we are a customer of that third-party provider. They need to do it the way we want it done. It can't be willy-nilly. It can't be, oh, lick your chops. I have a work comp case. I'm going to do all these tests. No, we go in and we meet with the orthopedics. We meet with the chiropractors. We meet with the physical therapists. And we say, look, here's what our expectations are. Are you in alignment with those expectations? If so, we can have a beautiful relationship. But realize you're not going to do anything with my employee until I have a say in it. So that has a little bit of a dual prong effect. Some employees think that we're trying to control their destiny. We had to really get ahead of that thought process and let them know, no, we're just spending a lot of time researching and developing relationships so that when you do have to go to the doctor, you're getting the best care. It's no different than a chef picking out your steak. You want to make sure the chef, you're using his expertise to pick up the perfect steak. That's what we're doing for our employees. We're making sure that the care that they get is top notch. And we let the employees know that we're doing that. And we also let the providers know that we're going to be watching every step that they make.
Yeah, and like this concept of I'm your customer, right? You as the manufacturing leader, I'm your customer to this medical provider versus just a user of their services, and how does that impact that relationship and their commitment to you? And I would say, and we've talked about this, that this behavior is scalable too, regardless of if you're a Fortune 1000 company or you're just a sole proprietor, with small staff. You can have this influence as well, right?
Well, and I think that even it may be said by a small company, we're too small, they're not going to care, but that's not true. As a small company, you actually have more agility. You have the ability to meet with those providers more frequently, potentially, and establish that relationship and that line of communication. It takes me a week out of every year to go to the meetings, to make sure that I'm having the confidential conversations with the providers. And it's just making sure that you're cultivating that line of communication and keeping it alive.
Yeah,
that's a really important piece.
One thing I want to be sure we have some time to touch on is this concept of industrial athletes. And we've heard you talk about your frontline, on the floor employees as industrial athletes. Can you explain why you refer to your staff that way?
Well, at any given time, especially in the company I'm in right now, my athletes, my employees can put on 14 miles a day. They might lift 10 to 15,000 pounds a day. They have to twist and rotate thousands of times a day. Where in there isn't that an athlete? I can tell you that most of my professional athletes don't do the work that the athletes in the finishing room do here. So if we look at our employee as an industrial athlete, then we can actually start to realize the sweet spot in performance. We have to really pay attention to recovery, and we have to pay attention to job sharing or rotating positions so that we're not burning that athlete out. In football, you have a defensive team and you have an offensive team. They have time off the field so that they're the best they can be on the field. We pay attention to that. It's very important. And if you're really, truly trying to get ahead of risk, and reduce your safety numbers, then I would say that you have to look at your employee as an athlete and use the metrics. The mindset is that your manager, your supervisor is the coach. In any high performing team, the coach knows every athlete. They know all their idiosyncrasies. They can see them from across the room and know that they're not feeling good. So you have to have a natural conversation. Where are you today? How are you today? It's that mindset that will change the whole idea and complexion of risk for a company.
It's really a different way of looking at it. And I think you're writing about this concept in your new book as well. And so we look forward to learning more, once that's published. As a spoiler, sorry, Doc.
Yeah, now I have to get it done.
Yeah, we have, well, the pressure's on now. We have one final poll question for the audience. So we're looking at like leadership behavior or lack thereof when it comes to employee safety. Poll question for the group: which detrimental leadership behavior do you believe has the most negative impact on employee morale and productivity, ultimately related to safety? We'll keep the poll open for 30 seconds. About another 10 seconds for those final votes. And let's go ahead and close the poll and show the results. Looks like, Vince, about a tie. Inconsistency in messaging and micromanaging. Let's move on to the next slide. Very interesting. Oops, sorry. So final question for you, Vince, in maybe 1 or 2 minutes, which is never enough time, right? So
never.
What do you see in your leaders that you wish they wouldn't do, and that you're trying to influence in terms of best practices, kind of in the C-suite?
Well, I think all 4 of these questions are actually very pertinent in this whole dysfunctional leadership question. When it comes down to it, I think that it's lack of connection, lack of communication that's really, really detrimental to the leader. Again, like I say to my employees, I have a skill set, you have a skill set. We are not better than each other in any way. We're going to help each other get through the day. You need to talk to me, I need to talk to you, and we're going to assemble the perfect year if we stay in concert with each other. So at the end of the day, effective communication, being consistent, all of these things are super, super important. We all have been under a micromanager at some point in our life, whether it was mom and dad or a boss at work. It's not a great environment to be in. And so when it comes down to it, this whole idea of industrial athlete and becoming a coach kind of changes this whole complexion of dysfunctional leadership, because you're not going to get very far as a coach if you can't communicate and if you're not paying attention to your people.
And that would go for the C-suite as well.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I recall you and I discussing like just how impactful it is to get one of those individuals out of their corner office to walk the floor as well. Visibility.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the executive leadership tier. It's almost like Florida. It's where people go to die. In a sense that I see a lot of laziness happen because they're no longer being forced to interact on a daily basis with all of the employees. So it's really easy to get complacent and start looking at metrics and numbers as the way to steer your company. But it's really, that's opposite. You steer your company from the ground floor up, not from the top floor down. So
and the results follow, right?
absolutely.
So, I know it's not as simplistic as that, and we appreciate your insights as we kind of wrap up the hour.